Hi folks, this is John Nizman from lastchanceautorestore.com. I'd like to share with you an update. This is the cab from the 1950 Ford F47 Canadian truck. For American viewers, it's equivalent to the F1 pickup. In our previous video, we shared with you where we had everything disconnected and the doors off and the steering column removed, and the cab in our previous video was just ready to come off of the chassis. So now we've removed it obviously from the chassis and have it on one of our dollies, and we started to deal with inspecting, and we had to test a few spots. So I'd like to share with you, because some of these, I don't want to ramble on and make this an uninteresting video, but this is extremely important. None of the car shows on TV or any of the body shops or restoration companies that I know of can explain or have explained clearly what's required in the bodywork stage, what paints are compatible, what will happen if you put one product on top of another, and things of that nature. So in some of our other videos we share with you where, because of old lacquer paint, we need to strip that down because it will react to anything that goes over top of it. But if you strip anything to bare metal, whether it's this cab, the doors, any piece of metal that's stripped down to its core, to the bare steel, there are only one of two products that you can or should put on direct bare metal. Number one is what we prefer to use, and that's a two-part epoxy. The main two epoxies come in either a gray or a black. We prefer to use the black two-part epoxy. The only other product that you can put on top of bare metal is an etch primer. And an etch primer is highly toxic. It's a funny green color. And what it does, the purpose of either black epoxy, a two-part sealer epoxy, or an etch primer is to bond directly to steel. So the best way to explain it, it's like the roots of a tree where the roots need to kind of dig in and need to fasten to something. It's the same kind of idea with the pores of the steel. So you need a product that's going to bite or adhere to the bare metal before you can go to the next step, which would be adding primer or sealants or things of that nature. So here at lastchanceautorestore.com, whenever we're stripping a vehicle down to bare metal, we prefer to use a black two-part epoxy, which will bond to that steel. Other people prefer to use a green etch primer. I'm not saying one is better than the other, I'm just sharing with you what we prefer. And then once you have the steel sealed and protected, the outside pore of that first application, so if it's an etch primer, the etch primer bonds to the steel. The outside pore of that, the pores are ready to receive primer to go on top of it. A two-part epoxy does the same thing. It has that same bonding agent. But if you reverse it or if you change the order of that product, you have terrible results, and it can be turned into almost like a disaster without sounding crazy. So what we're doing, getting back to our 1950 Ford truck, is we did some test spots, because what we had to do was figure out, number one, what was going on, what kind of products are on this truck. Is it just a quick, easy sanding, like block sand at 320, reprime it, put some guide coat on it and block sand it and get it ready for paint, or what do we have underneath it? And unfortunately what we had found when we did our little spot checks is we started to sand an area, and I had 240 grit paper, and as I started to sand it, it was taking off almost like balls. It was kind of rolling off, and it was soft. So instead of being a firm kind of feel to it with the block and the sandpaper, it was kind of, the product was balling as it was coming off, not really a powder, but more of like a chemical reaction, a gooey kind of substance. So what we had to do is figure out what was happening. So as we tested different sections of the cab, to cut to the chase, the wrong product was put on in the wrong order on this truck, unfortunately. So what has to happen, you can see we've been doing it here, is we've stripped the layers of paint and different product they have, down to bare metal. Now it's exposing some dents. You can see all these little spots here. But what we're going to try to do is share with you what's been going on. So we mentioned in the previous video, the windshield, around the windshield frames, there's lots of surface rust and pitting, and the camera can probably pick that up, and they just painted over all of that pitting. And here you can see it too. There's quite a bit of pitting and there's still rust in there. So they've trapped rust underneath or in behind and then sprayed product on. The biggest problem I have, and I can pick it up here, so this is the passenger side. This is the passenger side of the windshield, and this is the cowl, and then the hood attaches to here, or will be sitting in here. So as you come across here, it was extremely, there wasn't a lot of bonding agents in here, and so as we started to sand, it was literally coming off in chunks, and then you can see we have bare metal, and then we have this creamy beige product, then we have a light gray, and then we have this cream or this beige. So I thought at first my eyes were playing tricks on me, because if you picture this vehicle, if it's the same thing as the roof, you can see where we've tested the roof. So we have a whole bunch of, I think the camera can pick it up, there's a whole bunch of ripples and divots where someone's used like a grinder or something really aggressive to take the previous finish off of the metal, which has created a lot of like waves and dents and made the metal hot. But when you see this bare metal and you follow it along, we have gray primer. So this is just a normal gray primer that's been applied to this section of the roof. So they knew enough to sand it down to get rid of the old lacquer paint, which is going to react. But instead of sealing this bare metal with either an etch primer or a two-part epoxy to seal it, they've just used a normal primer to spray over top. It doesn't have the proper adhesion. It won't stick into it. So that's the first step that's kind of scary, that's a mistake. But then the next thing they did, which we sanded off, you can see as you come down here into the roof, we go from bare metal to a gray primer, and then we go to this cream colored stuff, which is actually it's an older product made by Evercoat, which is a different kind of primer. And they've put that over top of the gray. I'm not really sure why, because this is more of a finishing primer, but then after that, they sprayed this green color, which is an etch primer. So the bonding agent of etch, the only thing etch primer can stick to or adhere to is bare metal, the pores of the bare metal. And it literally bites into the steel and stays there. It's extremely difficult to sand off, just as epoxy is. Epoxy, when the two parts, when they breathe and cure, it completely bonds to that steel, and it's almost like, it sounds crazy, but it's almost like you have to burn it off, because when you're sanding it, it's the heat, and once it gets heated up, it's very, very difficult to get off. With this stuff, it's very time consuming, but you can see on the floor, this is just a little bit of sanding. It's coming off in a very light powder form. It's making quite a mess here in the shop, but there's several layers of this non-bonding material that's laying on top of each other. So, getting back to the cowl and the roof. So on this roof area, it's bare metal with incorrect gray primer on top of bare metal. Then they have this cream primer they've put on top, and then they've done an etch primer. And the etch is actually on top of, so it's reacting. It's actually a chemical reaction against the primer. So that's why we don't have adhesion, and that's why we're having such a problem. I believe that's why they stopped. They had such a problem with the paint, laying the paint properly. That's why there's runs everywhere, is because you had some chemical reactions going on underneath the paint. So getting back to the cowl, you can see here where we have bare metal, we have the beige or the cream, we have the gray primer, and then we have this, the beige, which they attempted to make this the finishing coat. As we test other sections of the vehicle, we come along here, we can see it's bare metal and gray once again. So this is the driver's side. When we come along to the back, we got lots going on. So this we had to strip down to bare metal, and unfortunately this whole truck will have to be sanded down to bare metal and start over. And the reason for it is because it's very clear here at the back of the cab. So here's our back window. And then the bed, roughly the top of the box of the bed is roughly around here. And it's very typical, as this one is. There's lots of waves and dents in the back. This is where pickup trucks generally get most of their damage, is along this back wall. And you can see there's low spots here from dings, and that's why there's so much. This white and pinky brown stuff, these are all body fillers that have been put on top to try and smooth, and you can see the different layers. The different colors signify different layers of paint. So what we've done is, as we were sanding along the back, and you can see it very clearly, is we have bare metal, old pink body filler, and then we have etch primer. Up here we have etch primer on top of gray primer. So we've got body filler and then it's reacting against itself. So we've got gray primer and then green etch primer on top of it. So once again, it's a chemical reaction. It's not happy and it's going to keep pushing against itself. It's almost like it's kind of a spongy kind of thing. So it's it all has to be removed. So all of these white sections you see here, this has been done correctly. So what they've done is, when they've stripped it to bare metal, is they've noticed some dents and dings, and they did their best to get most of the dents and dings out. I can feel quite a bit going on here. There's some high and low spots. So hopefully they hammer and dollied the best they could, and then you apply a little bit of body filler in a couple of different areas. We do it differently. We prefer to have all of the bare metal exposed and then treat it with a two-part epoxy, which seals all the steel. And then you hammer and dolly the best you can, and then that's when you would apply some smoother to those areas before you apply primer. But with the etch primer directly to the metal, or the epoxy directly to the metal, it seals the steel and protects it, and there's less risk of bubbling and reacting underneath because you're sealing the steel. So we've got quite a few issues going on. As you can see, once again, down around the fuel door, the fuel opening, we have green etch primer on top of the beige primer. So once again, that whole thing has been done wrong. So that'll all have to be removed. So on the inside of the truck, there's a couple of things that we noted, and basically inside the truck, or inside the cab. So at the back wall, it's kind of disheartening that you go through all this work. They obviously removed all of the trim and glass at an earlier stage because we have overspray with different products, but we don't have the metal painted or sealed. So these little square guys, those are sound deadener pieces that the factory set in as kind of an anti-vibration idea. So this square, and then these two little squares that they've turned like a rectangle, or on each side, they act as a sound deadener. But you can see all of the surface rust through the whole roof. This is bare metal, and it doesn't have any primer or anything to protect it, and it's all flaking rust. And as we know, rust starts from the inside, works its way out. So it's very disheartening to see this, because all we have is overspray of paint along this front header that you see. There's a cardboard headliner that gets put over top of this. So I guess it's one of those, the mentality of, if you don't see it, don't do it kind of thing, which is totally wrong, because what you want to do is protect this cab body in the metal for years to come. So the best thing would do is to remove these pieces of sound insulation, scuff all of this, sand all this on the inside, and apply a two-part epoxy to the complete inside, so that's sealed and protected. From there, you continue with the body work. So we're really kind of discouraged on what we see on not only the outside of the cab, but also on the inside, the lack of detail. And then to go one step further, the cowl and firewall area, if I just turn this light on to help, we have really poorly patched repairs. So you can see this pocket section here where you have this hole, that's the bottom part of the hood hinge assembly, and the other two are up here. As you come down further, I think the camera can probably pick it up. We've got rust holes here, and someone's taken a hammer, you can see it here, and distorted it. So they've actually hit it in, and then they've added body filler to the outside, because you can see there's body filler on the other side of that. So rather than do it properly, cut this rusted piece out, weld a new piece of steel in, and smooth it, they decided to just put body filler in behind, hit this with a ball peen hammer to force it in, and then put body filler in there. You can see the same thing here. I think the camera can probably pick it up. We have literally a rust hole through, and they've got a bunch of body filler that's hanging out of here. And then this is a total no-no. Up here you've got and this is fairly new, this is current, this is before it came to our facility. This is a piece of tin, and they've laid it on the back side of a rusted out piece of steel and then tried to weld it from this side to plug the rusted out holes. And then you come down further, I think the camera can pick this up, we have a lot of corrosion. And I think hopefully the light's not glaring too much, but you can see it's rusted all the way through. That's the original metal from 1950, and then they've put some product on the other side. Once again, used a ball peen hammer to push it in, and then try to do a patch of some type on the outside. So that's kind of discouraging. The firewall, you can see where they've welded up some holes in the firewall, but they didn't treat it with any type of rust inhibitor. And that's probably why we're seeing all of this undercoating in black on the floor and black on the firewall, because this should all be painted all the same body color. You know, when we get to the other side of the cowl, I think we'll trade sides with our lovely camera person, and we look at the passenger cowl area. So once again, this does get covered, ladies and gentlemen. After the bodywork and it's painted and the cab sets on, there is like a cardboard type of panel that fits over here, and it covers this in. But there's some structural stuff that goes on. So we've got quite a bit of corrosion, and you can see it's unprotected metal. This is all bare metal with various patches that were done. Same thing as the other side. Now some people would say, well, part of the fender is on the outside of that, and you don't really see some of this. But you can see here, so once again, this pocket or indentation, this is where the hinge gets bolted for the hood. Just below that, along this front firewall, this is old brazing that was done, so there's rust holes in the firewall. They've done some barbaric patching there and down into here, and it's untreated. You can see that's just all bare steel, especially in here. I think the camera can probably pick it up. There's absolutely nothing protecting the metal on the inside, and as we all know, condensation is going to build up on the inside and rust through. This is probably the nastiest part. So there's obviously a lot of corrosion there. It looks like they had good intentions at first, because they've cut a hole in an awkward position, and it looked like they were going to put a new piece of metal in here. So we have another piece of metal, but unfortunately, instead of welding it, they used some kind of, looks like just Bondo material, and you can see where it's kind of squirting out along the top and the sides. There's literally a hole through, because I think the camera can probably pick it up. There's a slit along here that daylight comes through, and that is totally unacceptable. So if you can picture it, the truck is all painted, it's assembled, and you're driving down the road, and you're either going to feel or hear a whistling of wind, or you're going to get condensation or rain coming in there. So kind of disheartening, so we'll have to do that. The proper way to repair those two cowls, and you can see from the outside, we've got different material, different product. We've got, once again, the etch primer on top of the beige primer, which is on top of the gray. And we have this pink stuff, which is really old body fillers. So the proper way to repair this, they have a replacement panel that they remanufacture, that basically you cut from here down. This whole piece gets replaced with a new piece and welded in, and that's really what should happen on both this driver and passenger side. So our next step is to continue stripping down all of the incorrect products that are on top of each other. And then we're going to talk to our client about the firewall, because really this firewall should be cleaned up to bare metal once again, and then it should be treated with an epoxy like the rest of the cab, and then this, to be done correctly, is always the same color as the body. So if we get the correct beige color, this whole firewall and mounting point, the underside and the whole cab should be painted all the same color. So we'll discuss this with our client, see how they would like that to go, and then we'll continue on. So this is an update on the 1950 Ford F47 pickup truck. I thank you for watching. I'm John from lastchanceautorestore.com.